Monday, the 9th of March. My colleague Sumit mentioned earlier on it's the anniversary of the global financial crisis sell-off today. So 9th of March is a cheerful date for everyone if you're in financial or commodity markets. There you go. We've got flat price trading 100 and my brain can't keep up quick enough with what's happening. I'll bring that in a minute. Here's the agenda today. We're keeping it very open, very dynamic. As always, get your questions in. The guys are happy to answer. We're doing something a bit more, dare I say, west of Suez focus today with the guys in the US. We've got Matt Smith, our resident US guru, and then guru number two now, recently hired Michelle. Welcome, Michelle. And then we've got Sumit, who's based in India. And we've got Homayoun. Obviously, Homayoun was on the call on Thursday. He heads up our crude analysis. We're going to touch cross-barrel. We're going to touch policy a little bit. I need to probably step out the conversation when it comes to policy and what's happening there. I should have introduced myself. I've been gassing away as usual. I'm the same person I was in the last webinar. I think so anyway. A little bit more tired than I was on Thursday, but same bloke nonetheless. Matt Stanley, I head up market engagement globally. I have to say, just to intro the call and what's happened, in the 25 years I've been in the oil market, I have never seen a market reaction gap up as it did this morning. I'm old enough to have lived through several black swan events. You know, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, COVID, 9/11. You know, these events don't come around very often, thank goodness. But this morning and what's happening in markets right now, I think, is the platform for us to try and air our views, answer as many questions as possible, try and put some clarity around the chaos. That is something that was our theme during our IE week session we had, which is a month ago today. And clarity around the chaos is certainly still that theme. So look, we're going to start east of Suez. We're going to start with my colleague Sumit. Before we do, I've got to put everyone under pressure, under the pump, because we're analysts. That's what people are going to do to us. Like I said, get your questions in. I can see a couple already. I'm just going to share my screen for a moment and talk about flat price. Okay, so I'm not, like I said, I'm going to put you under the pump. I'm going to put you under pressure, but I just want a quick recap. This is just what's happened today. So here's the close on Friday. We closed on Friday 92.69 front month Brent. That's May here. You can see 655,000 contracts so far on the front. At the open, 2 o'clock UAE time, we gapped up within 10 minutes to $111 a barrel. That was a slow grind up most of the morning. This is when I broke this. I did actually break this chair this morning because I fell off it when we hit $119.50. Since then, however, obviously gas oil, I'll talk about that in a moment, but just sticking in the prism of Brent, WTI was not far behind, of course, but in the prism of crude, it's been a slow grind down. Is that profit taking? Is that people absorbing news? We're now in danger of hitting below $100 a barrel. Who am I going to pick on first? I'm going to pick on Matt Smith first. Smithy, welcome. How's the US? Is it all calm on the Eastern Front?
It is. It's a beautiful sunny day here.
There you go. Okay, well, it's a beautiful sunny day here. It's a bit noisier, though, than it has been in the past, unfortunately. I'm not joking about that, but it does seem to have calmed down somewhat in terms of activity overhead. But when I dropped my parents at the airport yesterday, there was then a missile alert. I thought my mum forgot something and wanted me to run back to the airport, but it was a missile alert. Mum, I love you, but she's fine. I'm back in the UK, thank God. $101.86 on Brent. Structures bid. Just quick 30 seconds. Justified response this morning on flat price?
I think above 100. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, heading into the weekend, you started to see oil prices pricing in more of the reality, right, of the potential of the Strait of Hormuz being closed for longer here. And so then last night, obviously, with nothing really happening over the weekend in a progressive way, you got prices pushing higher. And so I think it's going to be that way. I know we pulled back a bit today, whether that's related to the SBR talk or otherwise, but I think if you expect that the price at the Strait of Hormuz is going to remain closed for the next week or two, then oil prices are going to go higher. That's it, right?
Look, Yeah, no, I think I firmly agree. Michelle, just coming to you on that point. Well, I'm in the States. You're further north than Maddie is, but um, yeah, look, I don't think anyone was surprised when Brent touched 120. Are you surprised that it's a sell-off of $20 a barrel since the session this morning, though?
No, I expect extreme volatility, especially during the day. I mean, you have producer selling, you have option harvesting, you have, I mean, when oil's up $25 a barrel, oh, you have a lot of longs just taking profit.
Yeah.
So I'm not really surprised at the volatility in the day. Do want to mention that oil is still up $10 a barrel. Like it's not as if it's selling off, right? It's just not up $25 a barrel. And it feels like, if you guys remember, like it feels like the mirror of COVID. So during COVID, the extreme move down had
Yeah.
extreme daily volatility, right? And we would gap down and then we would bounce up and then we'd gap down. And so I'm not really surprised at the price action. I think that we're in for extreme volatility, daily volatility.
Yeah, I think that's a fair call. And you're right to say, Matt, shut up a minute. It's still up $10 a barrel. That is a very, very fair point. All right, let's cross to India because I know he's going to gloat about his cricket victory yesterday. Congratulations, India. You played very well, well deserved. For the uninitiated, India won the T20 World Cup yesterday. So well done. Look, just on that, I think it's a fair reaction. Straits of Hormuz closed. The Straits of Hormuz are still closed. So do you expect this? Is this New World Order $100 oil until that rectifies itself? How long do you think that this rally can sustain?
Yeah, it's a good point. Like I think Strait of Hormuz is still closed, and looking at the amount of oil it used to go to Asia, I think particularly for the Asian refiners and Asian demand, and looking at overall S&D, like no one talks about S&D as of now, but it doesn't matter. But yeah, rally is expected to be. I think we will be seeing more than 100 for now. And if market is pricing in like Hormuz disruption to continue, yeah, we are in for a wild ride.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we're going to stick. I'm just going to touch with Homi and just to close up on the view on flat price, and then we're going to come back to you, Sumit, to talk about the US waiver on Russian crude, which I know a lot of people have got questions on. Homian, welcome back, mate. I hope you're well. Did you rest at the weekend, or did you keep your eyes on all your screens available?
No, I tried to rest a bit, but yeah, it wasn't easy.
Lucky you. Okay, well done. I think that one of the questions I had, which is quite interesting, we've been on a chat talking about what's happening in structure, further down the curve. And one of the trades that a lot of people have been looking at is, the summer spread, the June SEP Brent spread, which this morning we were talking about trading $18 a barrel. It's at $12.60 right now. The crude curve, it's moving linear, isn't it? But structure seems to be where a lot of people have placed their money. Last week, lots of people were talking about that the market's grown up, that it's not as knee jerk when it comes to how it's reacting, and people are not taking crude to $10, $20 a barrel higher. I was totally wrong on that because crude is $10 a barrel higher right now. Down the curve, though, do you think there's as much, and I'm not being flippant here in any way, that there is as much drama that people are pricing in about a sustained conflict?
Listen, I think actually what we're seeing right now will end up being bearish for prices. I'm not talking 2 weeks away, but a few months away. If you look at the back end of the structure, I think what's going on right now is allowing a lot of the US producers to hedge their future output. That means, they lock in a minimum price for their barrels, and that means that even if prices start dropping, it wouldn't necessarily impact their future output. As you know, the US is much more sensitive to prices in terms of short-term reaction. So there is that. There is also the outcome of the conflict, whatever happens. If there's regime change, if there's no regime change, if sanctions going to be lifted, you could assume that we could actually see more Iranian barrels down the line. Now, I'm speculating here, but what I'm saying is that despite the fact that the structure has the backwardation has really, really steepened. I think obviously it's probably too extreme right now, But I would expect the back end of the curve to remain pretty soft based on that. On top of that, you have all the talks about, SPR releases, which is not going to happen overnight if it's decided. It's going to be a gradual release of barrels. So yeah, so I think in a nutshell, what's going on right now, it is obviously driving markets crazy, but at the end of the day, I think Trump will be right in the sense that prices will end up dropping a lot more.
Trump will be right. Look, you've heard it here first, people. Let's not get into that though, because that we certainly haven't got enough time for that one. But I think that's a question. We're going to come to later on. SPR releases. I know we've all got a view on that. Bullish, bearish short term, but maybe bullish long term. But look, okay, look, thanks. I put you all on the spot there. I mean, that's what Kepler brought you in for. So I'm not that apologetic. But look, let's get into the weeds because I want Michelle and Smithy to pick up later on, sort of on a US focus. Immediate focus now is Sumit. I want to talk to you about the news that we had. I'm going to bring up your article that you wrote so proactively Friday morning. So look, for the uninitiated, talk us through what happened Thursday night with the US waiver on Russian crude oil purchase. Talk us through in detail around the amount of volume of Russian energy that India have been buying, the reliance, not them, not the actual company, but the reliance on Russian energy, what it means going forward. Is it just 30 days? I'll hand the floor over to you to sort of walk us through this article. And then there's a few questions that are coming in that will talk about this specific subject. So walk us through it, mate.
Yeah, thank you. So I think last weekend, like later part of the week, we came to know that US has waived off, like it was sounded like US has waived off India and allowing them to buy more Russian barrels. But if you look into details, like India was already buying Russian barrels. Like though the volumes have dropped since December, like at its peak, India was buying around 45% of Russian barrels. Now and since last December, like it came to around 20 to 22%. And I think that was the base load that was agreed between India and Government of India and US Department as they intend to close the trade deal that has been in linger for quite a while. So, but because of that drop, like what happened in last 2, 3 months, India diverted more towards Middle Eastern barrel. If you look at the starting of this graph, India used like pre-2022, India used to import around 50 to 60% of their volumes of crude energy from Middle East. And as India picked up Russian barrel, it reduced their dependence on Middle East from 50 to 60% to around 40 to 45% just. But as India recalibrated its energy demand. And since December, January, February, and Russian barrels took a hit, and that was mostly compensated by Middle Eastern barrels. So Strait of Hormuz closure, it brought a lot of question down home here, and like why we are so dependent on Middle East, why we are not going back to Russian barrels, and also if you look at Russian commodities on water, including floating storage around India, like when I wrote this article, it was around 30 million barrels, if I'm not wrong. As on today, I was checking this morning, it's already around 25 million barrels. So, so going forward, yeah, we do see Russian barrels quietly picking up because starting of March, our prediction for Russian barrels import in India was around 800, 850 KBD. As of now, if we see in our terminal, it's already 1.2 million barrels per day. So and Russian barrels have been bought across the refining system. It's not that only OMCs are buying, be it private, be it big mega private ones, OMCs, whoever can buy, whoever has established supply chain links with Russian traders, they are buying it. And going forward with Middle Eastern barrels drying up, particularly in the month of March, we do see like Russian barrels expected to ramp up to 2 million barrels per day. Given the volumes that are in Asian, particularly near Indian water, like Arabian Sea and all. But again, like one of the important factor to note is that Chinese refiners will also be going aggressively for these barrels. And we have not seen anything now, but but it will be interesting to see like if other Asian like Singapore, South Korea, Japan, they used to process Russian barrels a lot. But since what we have seen since February of 2022, they have self-sanctioned them. But as of now, the situation is unprecedented, particularly for Japan and South Korea. They import a lot, I think more than 70% of their volumes from Strait of Hormuz, with Japan being 85 to 90%. So it will be interesting, though we don't have any uh, trade route or trade flow happening in our system as of now. But yeah, it will be interesting, like if others Asian countries lap in to buy more Russian barrels. But particularly on India point of view, I think it's a good move. And also, like, this brings to my next part of the session, like question, like, will it impact Indian refining runs? Yes, it will surely impact Indian refining runs, and we don't see major exports happening, though there has been a very strong voice from the government that we are not curbing any exports, and refiners are free to do anything. But looking at the volumes availability and our runs, is that India runs will be going down by 6 to 7% in March, to around just 5.1, 5.2 million barrels a day, from 5.6 what they have been running since December. So, and exports are expected to go down as most of the OMCs and even private refiners look inward to supplying mostly the domestic crude. But yeah, I think it's a great move going forward.
Yeah, look, yeah, look, thanks for giving us that color, and thanks for the article so quickly on Friday. Look, a couple of things that I just wanted to pick up on that. And again, don't mean to throw you under the bus. Do you think it's only a 30-day waiver? Do you think that will be extended? Because this isn't just something surely that the US government just decided. There must have been dialogue between a lot of the NOCs within India, because they need to ramp up infrastructure. Is that 30 days? Do you think it's a one-off? Do you think it will be rolled? Well, I mean, I know that's a bigger question around possibly how long the conflict lasts, but it's linked, right? And then the second question, of course, what vast majority of people are talking about, which I know there's been a question in, what does it mean for imports from India into the EU of finished grade products, right? So let's start with the first one around, do you think the 30 days will be rolled? And then we'll get to the second one regarding products.
Uh, if you look at our article, what we published on 20th Feb, so we were very bullish on Russian barrels coming back to India. And personally, I don't say it's a 30-day game off. We will be seeing Russian barrels within the system as of now, because again, it depends on when we are seeing Strait of Hormuz getting the conflict getting over. Again, if it gets over tomorrow, the supply chain will need at least 6 to 7 weeks per se to fully develop itself, because you have crude production shut-ins happening. You need to ship in more uh, cargoes or vessels to load the product. Then it has to go to different suppliers. So I don't see it's a 30-day game off. Russian barrels is expected to be core part of Indian refining system for next few months.
Okay, yeah, because we've actually had a question in already about that very subject. And I think, this is a lot of people looking for that clarity. Do you have an estimate of how long after the conflict ends for Middle East Gulf exports to get back to pre-conflict levels? I'm trying to get a sense of the extent of damage to infrastructure and oil fields. Look, that's a good question. It's it's a tough question, but it's a fair question. We've seen Bapco declare force majeure. Iraq, probably the most economically sensitive when it comes to production being locked in. But your estimate is, you said 6 to 7 weeks. If the conflict and the conflict ends, Strait of Hormuz is open tomorrow. You see a 6 to 7 week sort of lead time for things to get back to pre-conflict levels. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, supply chain to normalize a bit. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, look, we can always be optimistic. We are at Kepler. We're optimistic people. My glass is always half empty. Trust me. All right. Look, we're talking about oil products into the EU. This is something I put to Andon last week when we were on the chat. Do the EU, as one of the biggest shorts in the world now, and sort of, and from an end user demand center, as especially on gas oil, right? Diesel, the world's biggest industrial use fuel in India as well. But 49% of the EU's diesel used to come from Russia before the Ukraine-Russian conflict, just to add some more depth there. And now India were one of the main, West Coast Indian refiners were one of the main suppliers. Do you, I think Andon put a 30% likelihood that the EU would come up with some form of whatever it would, some conduit to ensure that Russian energy is back in the EU energy mix. But do you think they start with Indian refiners running Russian crude? Those products are allowed to be imported into the EU again?
I think it depends. I think my point will be around 50% given the unprecedented situation we have. And if you look at how the prices reacted in last two trading sessions, this means that market is pricing Strait of Hormuz to conflict to get more deeper, more longer. So, and also coming to your point of if EU wants to take who was the major supplier for EU? Reliance Industries, and they have started picking up Russian barrels.
Right.
And again, like one can argue that they have two setups. One is for domestic as well, and one is for export oriented. And it depends on how EU clarifies it. But also looking at overall exports, we see a dip in it. So it will be very difficult for EU to pull in more barrels from India.
Oh, this is probably a question for Michelle later on when we pick up on the state section policy as well. If the objective from the US point of view was to this waiver on Russian crude being allowed to be imported into India, shouldn't that been a hand-in-hand approach with the EU in order for global prices to effectively I don't want to say weaken, but ease over the next sort of 2 or 3 months? Because 1 month worth of imports is only going to be around 8 weeks worth of product supply, right? If we're talking about that kind of lead time. I mean, I will ask Michelle this same question as well a bit later on, but your view there, shouldn't it have been a sort of some collusion there between the two blocks?
Yeah, I was expecting it. And again, talking in our teams, I expected this week EU should come up there is some waiver period, like what US has done to traders in the EU. Like you can process diesels from third country or jet molecules from third country
Mm.
processing Russian barrels. But again, it depends on how EU is seeing a policy shift or how EU is seeing overall the requirement of diesel.
Yeah, because I think what we saw last week when it came to pricing, what was baked into the cake was cracks, refining margins went through the roof, literally. And gas, oil, and jet fuel were the most exposed. You and Zamir mentioned that 20% of jet fuel exports come out of the Middle East Gulf, 10% of diesel. We've had a question in. I want to ask you this. If Indian refiners begin prioritizing domestic supply over exports, what knock-on effect would that have on global product balances? Now, I know we're not talking about global S&D because it's all being put through a loop, but surely there was a caveat in the waiver that if they're allowed to import Russian crude oil, a percentage of that crude, the products derived from that crude, must be available for export. Or was that discussed? Have I again thrown you under the bus there, or what? I mean, is it around energy security for India, or the fact that India is one of the biggest refining hubs in the world and can ease that burden out of the Middle East Gulf because those products are locked in the Straits of Hormuz?
Again, a good point. Whatever incremental India will be buying Russian barrel, it will not compensate for the overall volumes like India was importing. Let's put into some numbers. Like India is already buying 1 million barrels per day of Russian volume, and if it goes to 2 million barrels per day, what we expect in March, and via Strait of Hormuz, India was buying 2.6 million barrels per day. So you are still lagging by 1.6 million barrels per day of crude, and that corresponds to lower exports volume because again India demand is also 4.5 to 5 million barrels per day, and it's a peak demand season as of now with more of agriculture demand pulling in. So the priority gets sets more towards domestic market, and then whatever is, if and again, if the government sees here Strait of Hormuz is not getting conflicted, we not getting resumed quite soon, we might have an order that no exports to be done, like what we have seen with what we have heard with Chinese and what we are seeing with Thailand, and also there has been some discussion with South Koreans and Japanese refiners.
Yeah, I mean, look, another question. Yeah, you're right. You're spot on. And look, I know everyone's, thankful for how quick you came out with those articles. I know that you won't rest either. We had a question around, is China hoarding and taking Russian crude, or are they letting India take it all? Yeah, I mean, we're flirting in dangerous territory here, as we always do. But they're the good talking points, right? No one wants to talk about who's middle of the Premiership. You want to talk about who's top of the Premiership, Arsenal. But I mean, is that a conversation, just to wrap up with you, Sumit? Just is that a China and India talking to each other about this?
Yeah, I think it's one of the flowing conversation among the buyers in India here, like planning team. Like they were buying at -10 2 to 3 weeks back, and now it's most into positive territory. Why?
Really?
Again, like geopolitical risk premium, and you have more pressure or more buying activities happening in China. I will not say that they have started to buy at length, but yeah, they have been talking about more interest from Chinese buyers also.
And of course, I mean, no one's, what is yesterday's news is today's fish and chip paper, the old English saying, and Venezuelan news is so January, isn't it? It's amazing. All right, look, listen, mate. Thank you for that. To put you under the spot, but I know you're more than capable of answering those questions. So let's zoom it. Thanks very much, mate. Keep up the great work. Stick around because I'm sure there's going to be some bits that you're going to want to jump into. I'm going to move to Homian before we start with the our American friends. Homian. So when was it? The 6th of March. When was that? Was that Friday?
Friday. Yeah.
About a month ago. Okay, I want to talk to you about this article here, and if you probably got others, I'll bring them up. You let me know what you want to prioritize the conversation around, but to keep it fluid, 6th of March, why oil isn't at $100 a barrel
No,
yet?
it's good that I added the yet.
I was going to say, did you add this? This is updated 9th of March at midnight. Yeah, no, fine. Look, so I mean, talk me through the thought process here. Were you, I mean, did you just anticipate markets would open Monday stronger? Did you think that the market hadn't priced it in yet? I mean, you and Naveen obviously wrote this article together, but talk me through what your thought process was when you were putting this piece together on Friday.
No, I mean, this was really trying to explain why the market reaction was a bit delayed, right? Because the first few days of last week, you had a reaction in prices, and obviously this came on top of almost 2 months of continuously building risk premium into prices, but it didn't go crazy until last Friday, and then suddenly Friday you had Brent moving from 80 to above 90,
Yeah.
and at the opening, obviously we know what it did earlier today. So I think it was really trying to explain that. Um, Despite all the supply shock that everyone is focusing on right now, you still have in the physical market, you still have pockets of barrels available here and there, especially sanctioned crude. So, Russian, Iranian. So now Russian is not that sanctioned anymore for the Indian market. But you have the level of oil on the water, especially in the Asia Pacific, which is super high. I think if you go slightly lower, you'll see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this graph basically shows you that compared to the past 5 years, where almost at COVID level. So this is just Asia Pacific.
Okay.
And that's partly due to the fact that from the region, from the Gulf countries, you had a big bounce in their exports before the war started. So in February, exports from the region jumped by roughly almost 2 million barrels per day compared to the month of January. Part of that was also due to Iran, but the rest was due to the other countries trying to push as many barrels out of the region. So that I think partly explained why the market didn't go crazy in the first instance, and really was waiting to see what was the latest around the strait. And given that there was no large progress around positive news around the strait, then obviously suddenly I think money managers and other players in the market decided that the prices weren't as high as they should have been. The other point is, again, you look at in the short term, you have refinery maintenance, which is coming in Asia. It's going to be peaking around May. And the average between April and May is going to be roughly 2 points. Yeah, I think it's written somewhere. Yeah, 2.16 million barrels per day of refining
Yeah.
capacity that's going to be
Yeah.
offline. And you see from the chart that this is pretty well distributed, across the different countries in Asia. So that also in the very short term will limit to an extent, right? It will limit the rush into very expensive barrels for the refiners, because some of them will be running on lower will be running lower in the next few weeks. And then lastly, I think the probably most interesting chart in this piece that we wrote on Friday is, if you go slightly up, you'll see, yeah, this one. Here basically we try to assess how stressed some of the main consumers will be given the current crisis. And I know, Michelle, I think you did something around that as well, so maybe you can share that later on. But yeah, so here we try to look at the total level of inventories in these countries. So it includes commercial, it's not just strategic, but it does include the strategic reserves too. You see how much of that we consider as being in the SPR, and basically then we look at how much these inventories would cover in terms of imports from the Gulf, from the Persian Gulf. So assuming all these exports stop, and obviously we did in the model we have included the fact that we have some of the volumes coming from Saudi and UAE continuing with the two pipelines. But basically you see that China, the US, the EU are relatively fine. They can, endure the situation for a relatively long time. Actually, the US, because it doesn't import much from the Middle East, they can go on for years. But you look at other places like India, South Korea, Thailand, we're talking about maximum of 2 months that they can sustain the situation based on their current levels of inventory. So it's just to kind of highlight where that buying pressure in the short term in the physical market would come from, mainly based on where the inventories are currently sitting at.
Okay. I mean, look, why, in your view, and a few people have got different opinions around this, understandably, in your view, why did the market wake up this morning or over the weekend and say, okay, it was panic this morning. A 25% rally on flat price was panic. Was that because the new supreme leader was announced in Iran? There's longer, the longer that is there, that kind of leader, the longer that there's not regime change, this whole conflict is dragged out. Was that the main reason, or do you think that the market just simply looked at the amount of energy that's locked within the Middle East Gulf and said, we're simply at a point now where this is untenable and panic button was hit, or
I
both?
think it's a combination of factors. It's we had the news over the weekend that you had more and more supply disruptions. I mean, production cuts. You heard Iraq a week ago, but then you had Kuwait, UAE ADNOC came out. Today you have Saudi saying, also Aramco saying that they're reducing production at some fields. So I think it's the confirmation that the supply disruptions are actually there. As you said, the election of the Mojtaba Khamenei's son as the supreme leader suggests that the regime is not going to back down. So I think it's pretty much coming to the realization that the market was a bit too complacent, in the sense that the situation around the strait is not going to overnight improve.
Yeah.
And so it's the realization that this conflict, this war, could last a bit longer than initially thought. So I think looks to me that right now the market is pricing a disruption. I mean, a continuation of this war until the beginning of April, so around 1 month, and obviously based on the future developments and whether we think whether the market believes that the war will continue even longer, we'll see prices suddenly react a lot more and given to panic mode once again. And obviously, because you had the weekend in between, so and you didn't have any positive news
Yeah.
for more than 48 hours, then suddenly, the market opened very extremely.
Yeah, look, I mean, just, where we are, I mean, we've seen, which makes me more anxious, is that we've seen a notable decrease in the amount of drone activity in Dubai. Abu Dhabi seems to be more targeted. Bahrain's being targeted. We'll get onto that a bit later on, but someone asked me earlier on, and I won't repeat what my answer was because I'll probably be let go. Let's just put it that way. But with the regime change seemingly, you said Khamenei's sons come in. If, and I don't want to be sort of moribund here, but if he was targeted and that part fell, do you think that that would then instill regime change simply because the US are going to target him again and again? Would that be the catalyst for the market to turn from being skeptical to being optimistic that there would be regime change coming in?
I think the next few days is going to be key because it feels like, and I think you agree with me, it feels like it's been months or a few weeks already of this. But it's only day 10 of the initial since the initial attack. So it's still very early. And
Yeah.
even Trump, I think the very first few days, he said it's going to last at least 4 weeks. So I think, yeah, so far it seems that the regime is very resilient and is even winning it because of the impact on the oil price and the fact that will build up pressure on the U.S. administration to try to find an exit solution as fast as possible. But I think again, it's only day 10, so the next few days are going to be extremely important in terms of how much they continue to weaken the regime's ability to launch missiles and drones.
Mm.
I'm not a military expert, but I would say that the next 10 days, 2 weeks, going to be extremely critical in that. As for the actual regime, I think um, you still have roughly 7, 8, 10 leaders who really count, who are really important, and who are still alive. So Moshtaba Khamenei was one of them, but you have other people, the head of the judiciary, the head of the parliament, and so on and so on. And I think as long as you have a key regime figure that is still alive,
Mm.
the regime is going to cling on whatever is left, and will try to not negotiate, but we'll try to survive as long as possible. But if you have a few of the remaining top leaders that are known to everyone in Iran being killed, then suddenly the regime loses a lot more legitimacy because it lost Khamenei already, I mean, the previous supreme leader. But again, you have the apparatus is still very strong because the other top leaders still reportedly alive. Now, there are rumors in Iran that actually Moshtaba Khamenei is already dead, and that all this is a way to sustain, the morale within RGC and Basij troops. Who knows? But I would say that as long as you have all these top leaders still alive, the regime is going to remain alive, and that puts the question into what is the US end goal? Is it actually regime change? I think you heard the past week that Trump is trying to assess whether there'll be boots on the grounds.
Yeah.
Potentially, that was seemed out of the question 2 weeks ago, and now it's not so much out of the question, it seems. So I think, yeah, after that, it really is down to the US end goal there. The other point that I want to highlight is that if you have those top leaders not killed yet, seems a bit surprising to me. So either they're not able to kill them, or it's actually a way for both the US and Israel to try and have a sense of continuity over the next few days. And maybe they're already discussing behind the curtain. Who knows? But yeah, I think as long as you have that top leadership still there, it's going to be the regime in Iran is only willing to survive. Survival means victory to them, even if a lot of the infrastructure is destroyed. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter to them. It will be a political victory, and so
Well,
that's
that
why I
is.
think it's going to be important for the U.S. and Israel to decapitate what remains.
Right. I mean, look, thanks for that. That was cheerful. But it is the brutal reality of what we're in. Someone's, I want to insert the Kepler caveat that we don't subscribe to rumors and any of that. So, but rumors are rumors, aren't they? I mean, someone's made a good point as well. Don't underestimate the visual of oil tanks on fire. I think that has scared the hell out of markets. I think that's a very, very valid point. Within Iran itself, Homer, I mean, you know, I think what people can't kind of grasp is the context, the gravity of the attacks that Tehran are going through, that military installations are going through across the country, but also media coverage. It's obviously biased depending on what you read and who you watch and all of that. If you were to give it a balanced view, I mean, how how dramatic have the attacks been that the US and Israel have been firing on Iran? I mean, are they crippled? Is it expected? Because a lot of especially in the press here, which historically has been very anti, you know, column inches around actual conflicts within the region. A lot of the press, a lot of the UAE press, Saudi press, don't cover it essentially, but there has been quite a lot. You're balanced. If you were to have a neutral view, what regard would you say that Iran expected this, and where they are now in reality when it comes to infrastructure, military installations? Just wrap up on that before we go
Yeah.
hand over to the guys in the States.
It seems that again, I'm not a military expert, but it seems that they were actually better prepared than what the US initially believed them to be. That's something that I think transpired over the weekend. So I would say that you look at what's happening militarily. Obviously, they're losing it. Like they've lost key figures. They have a lot of bases, military bases, been hit. Reportedly, I mean, as you said, news really are trickling out of the country. Internet is still 99% cut. That's why, by the way, when you have foreign media going in and have access to internet, it seems a bit strange, like that they have easy access to internet. So maybe it's something that the regime wants them to say. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the installations are being hit, and reportedly the main targets is really on the RGC bases, the police stations, missile launchers, inventory. I mean, factories where you have the inventories of drones. Now, I would say that again, because of the fact that the regime would win politically if it just survives, it raises the bar super high now for the US and Israel. So the main leverage that the Iranian regime has is to really increase the cost of that, and so far kind of succeeding. You have the rise in the oil price. It seems that if you have high oil prices for a period of 3 weeks, 1 month, you will start to see impacts on inflation, and that's where obviously Trump would be pressured by other priorities, and potentially would be weakening his willingness to go until the end. And that's the goal of the Iranian regime, and it's very likely. I mean, this has a high possibility of succeeding, I think. The other question, though, is with the attacks that they're having on all the regional countries, including where you are, Matt, these countries in the region are seeing this. So the key question is, can we come back to normal after this if the regime survives? Like, do we see the UAE, Saudi Arabia, other countries? Turkey today has been reportedly targeted a second time. Will we see these countries, have normal relationships with the regime? I think this is a very risky bet that Tehran has taken. And my point of view is that there is now kind of a consensus being built across the region, which wasn't the case maybe even 2 weeks ago, that even though they're not officially supporting the operations from the US and Israel, but there is implicit support, at least is my point of view, for what is going to happen. So what I'm saying is it's only day 10. It could last at least a few weeks. And I would say that even though it seems a relative failure so far on the political front, You need just a quick catalyst for this to switch. So it's going to be an interesting few weeks, and obviously the risk to the oil price, as Michel said, is going to be extremely volatile. But the risk so far, as long as there's no positive news around the Strait of Hormuz, is obviously more tilted towards the upside.
Okay. Look, thanks, Matt. I think that's a very, very fair, sensible, candid set of answers you gave there. Last one with you, Hum, just while you're on. We saw a tender out today from the Aramco for exports out of the Red Sea. Someone asked me, and I'm not going to name names, but someone asked me, is that real or is that taking advantage of a high flat price environment?
I think it makes sense. I mean, you look at the spot markets going absolutely crazy, more than the term barrels. So if
Yeah.
they can sell more on the spot market, it's more revenues. So I think it totally makes sense. It's making the most out of the exports that they still have. So far, we haven't seen the Houthis, start disrupting the flows around the Bab el-Mandeb. So
Yeah.
fair play to Aramco for trying to make as much as possible from this situation. It does make sense.
Yeah. Look, it's I'm not going to apply the cliches, but in a higher flat price environment, it's optimization, I think is what they call it. Look, mate, thanks a lot for jumping on. We appreciate it. The slides that you put together on Thursday are still very much relevant, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a few slides. Maybe at the end we can go through them. It's really just an update on the numbers, especially around this, crossing the strait.
Yeah.
It's not something huge news, right? It's almost zero
Okay.
since a week ago. But yeah, I have
Yeah.
a few slides. Maybe at the end we can go through them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks, mate. Look, appreciate it. You and Sumit, I know you're going to stick around. So, I'm not around now, but I think Reed's going to host the next one on Thursday. But thanks again. Look, we're going to jump over to the other side of the Atlantic, the calmer side of the Atlantic, where Matt Smith and Michelle Bruhard are. God, where do I begin? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask Michelle this question. Sorry, Smithy, I love you, but I mean, I'm going to ask Michelle. Someone told me about a rule. You'll know a lot more about this than me. It was my mate who was American on my podcast. I lots of American friends. The 60-day rule before it has to go to Congress, Michelle. End of April, there seems to be a 4 to 6 week timeline that came out of the US White House press secretary yesterday before it has to get congressional approval. Is that right? Excuse my political naivety about this 100-day rule or something. Can you just walk me through that quick?
I don't think I can. I wish I could. I am not sure. I'll have to look into it. The
Okay.
60-day rule you mean for war?
Yes.
Well, he was supposed to get approval before he went to war, which is the
Right.
whole reason for Congress, the uproar that we're currently having in Congress, which is he was supposed to get approval before he went to war, which, like, to give you an example. So in 2013, Obama had a red line in Syria. And he said to Assad, if you gas your people, we're going to bomb you. And then it was his big foreign policy blunder, right? He didn't do it. And instead he went to Congress to ask Congress, can I do this? And Congress said no. So instead of Trump going to Congress to ask, can I bomb Iran? He just did it. And he has said that he has, if you listen to him, he calls it a war. And if you listen to Rubio, he calls it a war. If you listen to Hegseth, he calls it a war. If you listen to the senators, they call it a strike. So they're not calling it a war because they know that if it was a war, then they should have gone to, then he would have had to go to Congress to get approval. So there is some of that. I don't know about the 60-day rule, but I'm definitely going to look into it, and I can
didn't know
report
either.
back.
Sorry if I
So
threw
yeah,
out
I'm
much,
so
but-
sorry.
No,
I
go
wish
ahead.
I wish I knew what this was. I'm definitely going to look into it. Unfortunately, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a global policy person.
Well,
So,
what lawyers-
but I
that's
am
what lawyers say as
definitely going to
well.
look.
That's what lawyers
Great
say
question.
as well. It's not. No, it's a good question. It's, it all needs clarifying. I think I think Russia called it a special military operation, don't they?
Who?
The
Senate.
Russians call Ukraine a special military operation. Is that right?
Yeah, they might. They don't call it a war, but obviously Ukraine calls it a war. And if someone bombed the United States, we would call it a war. So it looks like a war, and it smells like a war, but hasn't been deemed as a war. It's deemed as like an air campaign of bombing Iran to get rid of. There's been a number of moving targets as to why we were doing it. I can say though that we've never seen in history a regime change through an air campaign. So if the goal is regime change, then maybe boots on the ground can do it, but we don't have a great history of regime change, whether it's Iraq, whether it's I mean, there's a whole host of countries that we could list. I won't go through them. And then also regime changes happen with like the domestic overturn. So there were two options for regime change: boots on the ground, or like the domestic population rising up and overthrowing the government. But air campaigns are probably not going to be the way to get a regime change.
And what's the sort of mood within the States? You know, midterms coming up. You know, this is a lot of people have been talking about, you know, that this could be, you know, this sort of highlights his presidency. What's the sort of mood within the States around what is happening, what it all means? Is it, I mean, I saw a Tucker Carlson thing where there was a 90-10 polling in Trump's favor or something. I mean, there's so much is sort of coming through. Yeah, I mean, what's the mood internally?
I'm gonna post a disclaimer, which is I live in New York. So it's the United States is a very, very big place, and there are varying views across America on whether or not this war is a justified war, or this air campaign is a justified air campaign. And so initially, when the president came out, he said that we're doing this, we want regime change, and we're going to defend the people. Then it was, we're going to get rid of the nuclear program. And then it was, oh, we need to get rid of the ballistic. So there's not like a clear strategy that the president or the administration has come out that has like set out the guidelines. So there's a lot of confusion in the US around exactly why we did this, because, and to be fair, and Hamiyun knows this, and probably everybody knows this, I did not think the US would do this. And the reason why I did not think they would do this is because Trump's agenda that he laid out in the national security strategy and his economic agenda, this is counter all of those things. His national security strategy was to focus on the Western Hemisphere, and his economic strategy is low energy prices for inflation, for manufacturing, and just as in general to cater to the American people. All of those strategies are counter to this campaign. So I actually didn't think he would do it. I thought he was just trying to like flex. And the fact that he did go in and do it, it is turning out to be exactly what I think a lot of us had suspected, which is we're going to have higher prices for inflation, higher energy prices, higher energy prices for manufacturing. We're not focused on the Western Hemisphere. This is very, very expensive for the American public, which is another problem that we have. So there are a series of things. I'll leave it there. I could go on and on, but how does the American public feel about it? In general, I think that we're all a little confused as to why this happened. And when he laid out his agenda, this wasn't what we had anticipated.
Right. I mean, it's a very strange dynamic for us here as well, because, you know, I've lived here 15 years, met my wife, family here. It's been a very secure environment to bring them up and raise them up in. And now I find myself yearning for Donald Trump to give me some comfort. It's not a nice position to be in, if I'm honest, Michelle, but it is what it is. But it is, you know, I think, okay, let's move on before I get cancelled. The Bloomberg came out with an article earlier on saying that, you know, higher energy prices, inflation, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank may have to raise interest rates. Reid put something out, I think, on Friday around interest rates. Don't want to labor it too much, but surely that is now a concern that the market has in general, that fiscal policy has to move with, you know, military policy.
Yeah, I mean, I again, this is why I actually didn't think it would happen, because even his fiscal policies aren't met with high energy prices. And the question is, and I think the thing is that the anticipation was it would look similar to June 25, right? Where we went in, struck, oil prices went to $85 and then collapsed again.
Yeah.
But this is the first time since the Arab Spring that we've had an actual physical disruption, right? Russia, Ukraine, we did not have a physical disruption. We didn't lose any we didn't lose any barrels. So this is the first time since the Arab Spring. So when people ask, oh, are we going to see $60 again by the end of the year? I'd like to think that we probably will not, because geopolitical risk premium will hang out in the price probably for a very long time, because how long are we going to feel comfortable that ships can pass through the strait without any sort of incident that will happen? And then the second thing I will mention as to why I think that there will be a constant bid in energy prices, is that energy security is now the very top of mind of every government in every single country. So energy security, which we kind of have like all been lulled to sleep on because of shale, and it has like solved the energy security problem and we don't have to rely on the Middle East so much. Now all of these countries are going to build SPRs and just be filling their SPRs so that they're not subject to this crisis again.
Okay. Look, great points. And I want to do a deep dive into an article you wrote yesterday, really great, using Kepler's war endurance model. I mean, it's fabulous. I mean, it's not fabulous, but you understand.
I mean, I did make up the name, to be fair, but
no, but it's the idea is great. And I love that. I love the how deep you thought about it. So let me come back to you on that, because I want to go run through that article with you. I just want to move to Smithy. Hi, mate. You've been very patient for 57 minutes. You always are. I hope you're well over there. Michelle, judging on, running on from Michelle's points there, we've long heard drill, baby, drill. One of the main questions that everyone's had, when Europe didn't get its diesel from Russia anymore, as Michelle said, the Russian flow didn't dry up. It just, the circus moved on. It shifted, and there were different buyers for that diesel, for example, that went to Latin America and other places. And then when Latin America were being supplied by the US Gulf Coast, the Gulf Coast then supplied Europe. So it's this odd sort of triangulation we're in.
Yeah.
The main question that we've got, I know, we were talking about this yesterday, what role could the US play? What role could US supply play in balancing the whole market? Because I asked this question to Paige Laura on Thursday around gas. And look, as much as the US might want to do something, there's simply not enough room in the system for the US to produce enough to supply what might be knocked out from the Middle East Gulf. What's the situation in sort of crude markets and refined products?
Yeah, sure. And it was interesting what you're talking about with supply, just with the US, is like, is there any kind of supply disruption? One of the main conversations we've been having over the last few days here is like, even though the US isn't having supply disruptions, prices at the pump have been going crazy, right? They've gone up like $3.50 from $3. Diesel has gone up like 90 cents from over the last week, and so that's like 25% on a retail basis. And that's the worst thing ever for Trump, right? Because the US is so unique in that everybody drives, and every 3 miles you see this billboard at the gas station that tells you what the price at the pump is. And so that influence there is massive, right? And so I think that's playing into the sentiment. But in terms of how the US can step up, Johanna's put out a great piece probably a week or so ago now, right, saying about the US production forecast, like hedge and hedge some more. Like this, the US producers must be pinching themselves, right? The ability to be able to layer in hedges in the 70s here over the next year. And so that, from that side of things, is, we talk about the obvious winners out of this situation. Russia is a key one. The US producer is also one as well, right? But if you're talking about, can the US step up and address the issue from a crude perspective, the answer is no, because it's just the wrong type of crude, right? US exports about 4 million barrels a day. 90% of that is light sweet crude. Reed and myself have run the numbers before, like looking at what's the export capacity out of the US. Maybe it's 6 million barrels a day, something like that, maybe a little higher. But that's going to be that incremental piece. There you go. That's that slide. Just if you go down the chart a little bit. Sorry, go back up.
This one, yeah?
No, that one. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Just showing you the how the production we're seeing it increasing this year now. So But yeah, in terms of the exports, right, it's a light sweet barrel. That's the incremental export. If you wanted to talk about medium sour barrels being exported from the US, we've never seen more than 460,000 barrels a day. It's like a Gulf of Mexico barrel that's typically being used there. And so, is the US the panacea to resolve this issue? Not at all, right? From a crude quality perspective or a volume perspective. In terms of the product side of things, the US faces its own type of issues, right? In that the in terms of pad five, a quarter of those imports are Middle Eastern crude, but well, I think it's 85% of jet fuel imports into pad five are coming from South Korea. South Korea refineries are cutting back, and
Right.
so pad five is probably going to have the biggest challenge in terms of the refined product side of things. If you think about the coastal pads, and we'll get to pad three in the exports in a sec, but when you think about pad one, you've got diesel that is being imported predominantly from Canada, and then you've got from Dos Bocas. Sumit will like that, and as I'm sure he's well aware that Dos Bocas is sending diesel into the US, which is the wildest thing. And then on the gasoline side, I think we get a lot of gasoline from Europe and Bahamas. And so, in terms of the export side of the picture, the US, to your point, Matt, I think, Stan, as you were saying, there has been this kind of triangulation. I think we're seeing more Russian going into Brazil now. That's
Yeah.
picked back up as we've seen fewer drone strikes, so more diesel exports are going out. That's given the ability for the US to step up and send some diesel across into Europe there. But even just like George Shaw on the team was writing about the jet fuel side of the picture, where is Europe going to get jet fuel from going
Right.
forward here?
Yeah.
And he was like saying, well, the US can maybe step up a little bit, but the Atlantic Basin just doesn't really have the ability on the
Yeah.
jet side of things to plug that gap. And so every region, right, has a different issue going on across a different
Yeah.
commodity, just because
Yeah.
the Middle East isn't getting that, Middle East jet isn't getting out and going to Europe. Middle East naphtha's not getting out and going into Asia. Middle East diesel's not getting out and going into Africa. And so
Yeah.
it's all dislocations everywhere.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when you mentioned the Gulf of Mexico there, do you mean the Gulf of America?
I know, sorry, my bad. I'm
Sorry. That's a whole different
you
webinar. Yeah, don't
you
know.
were you were waiting like 4 minutes to call me out on that.
I was cucking. No, but I'm joking. But no, it's a good point. But I mean, sticking on pad five for a minute within the States. I mean, that's been a story since, what was it? The Valero refinery in P66 have closed one, and
We've
that's
got
it's
Benicia
expensive.
closing, yeah.
Yeah, so we've got all these refineries closing down. This is same question. I put this on a chat earlier on that if if Russian crude is allowed back into, say, the European market, or certain crudes are allowed into, say, the US market, that's great. But aren't those regions running out of refineries?
Well, Pad Five, yeah, with Valera Benicia, we can see that's closing down right now. They've halted their crude imports, and so
Yeah.
it's not just the jet fuel where you're getting South Korea sending jet in; they're sending gasoline into Pad Five as well. You've got that whole, Gulf Coast produces gasoline, then sends it to Bahamas, then it goes up to the US East Coast. You're getting that picking up to the West Coast as well, simply because they haven't got enough products because their refineries are closing. So, yeah, it's an issue.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's going to be, the only person we haven't heard from Greta Thunberg yet around these energy security issues. I wonder if she's on a boat on her way here somewhere. But anyway, look, Michelle, just what Smithy mentions there, I think is really important, and I think the end user, you can always count on the Daily Mail in the UK to come up with a grim story around what the price of oil, what's happening in the crude oil market, because the AA, the Automobile Association in the UK, say don't drive as much because the price of petrol's going up. So that's some good counsel there. But when it's on the billboard that gasoline prices are 30% higher, we do get to this dynamic where we're talking about demand destruction. Let me just bring up your article that you sent out yesterday. Let's get into that chat, because this is important. And I'm not, we've been talking about jet fuel and what's coming out of the Middle East Gulf. I think there were 37,000 flights that were cancelled last week. So there is that element of demand destruction. Let's get to this one here. Talk us through this article. Your thought process, demand destruction? Is it across the barrel? Is it regional? Is it as Matty says, like pockets in each individual country as well? Or is this a global thing?
Well, Matt's right. It's definitely pockets. And the reason why I started this building this model was because I kept getting a lot of like my friends that are trading, like has anyone put together a day's cover analysis on like how long we have left? And the reason why no one's done it is because it's not an easy task. You have to make a lot of assumptions. But basically, I also thought this is actually going to be very important for governments to understand what does the world actually look like in regards to how much oil is actually possible. So that was basically how I started this project. And then I went in to look at flows. Like, what do the flows look like out of the strait? Where are products going? Where are crude going? And then what are alternative supplies? And then how much does each country make of their own product? So if we just talk about PAD 5, for example, it gives me like this model will tell me after 20, by the way, we're on day 9 of the war, I think. We're on day 9, I think. We're on day 9. By the time we get, right? Day 9, right?
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
By the time we get to day 28, PAD 5 has a jet fuel problem.
PAD 5.
So like PAD 5. PAD
US
5
West
has a
Coast.
jet fuel.
Yeah.
US West Coast has a jet fuel problem. And the reason for that is because they receive product from some product from the Strait. They also receive some product from Asia, right? So they're dependent on this Pacific refining regime in order for them to be able to get products. And if those refining, like the refining countries, for example, China or Thailand, which has also announced that it's going to ban exports, like when we start getting countries that start banning exports, that starts to constrain these countries that don't have refining capacity to make their own product. So an article came out today about Europe and how Europe is fine on product. And so if you go, and I was curious, do I also see the same? Yes, right. Europe has a problem with jet fuel by the time we get to day 53. So Europe has a little bit of a runway. And then if I look at from like a crude perspective, how much crude does each region have? We obviously know that a lot of crude flows from the Strait into China and India. And then there's alternative supplies, right? Like we know that the Saudis are moving crude through the Yanbu. We know that that Kuwait and the UAE can move a little bit more through Fujairah. And then we have Russian oil that's now going to be able to go to India. So once we start moving those around, I have about 6 million barrels a day of like alternative supply. And then who gets that? How do you allocate that extra 6 million barrels a day? And then can they refine it? And then if they can refine it, can they meet their domestic demand? And so again, there's a lot of moving pieces. I wanted to put this together for governments. I'm passionate about energy security. I think I've said it a million times, it's so annoying. Energy security is national security. And I want countries to feel energy secure so that they can grow and develop and their populations can live healthy, happy lives.
I mean, I join your crusade, Michelle. I join it. What point do we get where governments start to step in to subsidize fuel prices then?
So I don't know about subsidizing fuel prices. I think the reason why you bring that up is because we saw it during Russia-Ukraine and we saw Europe subsidize, right? So we saw Europe and the UK subsidize fuel prices. There are still policy levers that these countries can pull. And some of those include the SPR. Now, here's the interesting thing. The IEA has SPR requirements, which is if you are an IEA country, you have to have a certain amount of days cover of whatever product you're importing. The US, which is why the US had such large strategic petroleum reserves, we've drawn down that because we're a net exporter. So the beneficiary to this entire crisis is the US because we're a net exporter. We can produce as much oil as we consume. And I'm talking US and Canada because Canada is basically held hostage by the US and they can only send their oil to the United States. So when I look at sorry, I totally lost my train of thought, Matt. I'm really sorry.
No, you're fine. When you're looking at subsidizing the price of petrol from
Oh yeah,
outside the
subsidizing.
US, yeah.
It doesn't even like cross my mind that subsidies are an option, because it's definitely not an option in the United States.
Yeah.
The United States can pull levers, right? And these countries can pull levers. Like you can release the SPR. And the SPRs were created for those unique countries. The SPRs were not created for the world. Right? So the US SPR is for the United States, and France's SPR is for France, and Germany's SPR is for Germany. It's not for the whole wide world. And so when these countries are like, we're not going to release the SPR yet, and you think, why wouldn't you release the SPR? You look at their how long can they make it before they're going to, right? And so I think because once you start releasing the SPR, you don't have flows are going to change all over the place. And I think that is the reason that people are waiting on the SPR. The US SPR was created for the United States, and we don't need the oil yet. And to release it to ease oil prices in the world, I think that would be one of the reasons why they would release it.
Okay, well, isn't the other lever, hasn't Donald Trump got his hand firmly on that when it comes to tariffs? And the reason I ask you that, I used to have family in Canada, in Sarnia, across the border from Michigan. I still, lovely part. And people used to go across the bridge into Michigan to go and fill up the car and then come back into Canada. Since the tariff issue, that stopped. That traffic has stopped. I'm not saying we're getting to the point with cross-border smuggling, but when you're talking about a situation we're in, sorry, I'm not, that's an insinuation that'll have me fired again. Third time I've been fired in an hour and 15 minutes. No, that's okay. I mean, is that leverage that Donald has, that the US government have, easing tariffs to, help that flow of gasoline or diesel across borders?
Across Canada to the US?
Yeah.
Oh, I think that, so the US East Coast imports Canadian gasoline, but the Midwest is imports crude oil, and I don't think there's a tariff on crude oil. I think if there is, it's like a marginal tariff. Energy typically is excluded from the tariffs. Right. So I would be surprised if there was any sort of tariff on import on crude or products coming into the US. I think that was one, when all this tariff stuff was going on, there was you saw big moves in Canadian crude because we didn't know if they were going to be tariffed or not. It ended up that Canadian crude was not tariffed. One of the levers the US does have is to lift the Jones Act so that we can move product from the US Gulf Coast into Pad 1, so that Pad 1 isn't so dependent upon European flows into European gasoline flows. So that is one option, another policy option that the US government has. Another policy option, which is one that has come up a few times in the past, is for the US, is this gasoline tax holiday. I always say the words in the wrong order. Or gasoline holiday tax. I forget what it is, but basically they get rid of the federal tax on gasoline, which is like 30 something cents. And so you could not collect federal taxes for gasoline. I mean, again, but that again goes back to, we already have a budget problem. So you would be taking away revenues from the federal government. I find it very unlikely. It's failed in Congress twice, at least. If it got brought up again, I'm not confident that it would pass. But that would be the US subsidy, which I find very unlikely to happen.
What is this tax you speak of? He says coming from the Middle East.
But I got standards.
Yeah,
I just want to chime in, and I don't have the answer here. I may have the wrong answer, but just when we're talking about like a release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserves, right? Yeah. At that point, if that were to happen, or as it's going to happen, and this is a question for Michelle, that like the way that I view it is more of a sentiment impact, because when you're losing 15 million barrels a day of crude coming out of the Strait of Hormuz, there's no way that these barrels are going to be able to come out straight away. It's going to be a slow impact, and so really it's purely a sentiment thing, and it shows their desperation to a certain extent. Is that fair?
Oh, you know what? These are real barrels, right? Like this is like real supply coming to the market. So the release of the SPR is real barrels, not just like sentimental barrels. Can I call them that? I don't even know what to call them that. But like it would ease, I think the market would be eased to that yes, there's going to be additional supply coming to the market. I understand the fear of being able using your last resort, especially if you're in some of these countries that are like, okay, well, I have, 130 days before I reach like a critical point. So I'm going to wait to release my SPR because I don't want to, I don't want to cause, um, I don't want to ease prices, then demand pick up, and then everyone thinks that they're happy. And then this crisis goes on for another 3 months, and then there's nothing. So I guess I can kind of understand the pause about releasing the SPR. I think releasing I think we have seen the article that the US government is considering selling futures as if this crisis that we're having is a speculatory problem. The problem that we have right now is that this is not a speculation. Like oil prices aren't $120 because of speculators. Prices are $120 because we can't get the oil, right? Like they're $120 for a reason. They're $120 for a reason. And this in June 2025, they were $85 for speculation. I get that. But today it is not a speculatory issue. We have a real supply problem, a real physical problem. And so releasing the SPR, while it would ease the prices a little bit until the structural problem is fixed, I think we're going to continue to have real issues, real high prices. And like I said, even when the structural problem is fixed, or there are some boats that can come through the strait, there still is going to have to be a geopolitical risk premium. Because what happens, all you need is one boat that gets hit before this thing goes haywire again. So I don't know. I went on a tangent about speculation, mainly because as a prior oil trader, I'd always get like hit up on oh, you're just a speculator. But like, this is not a speculation issue.
No, it's a totally valid point. And Smithy, I think it's a really good question you asked. And look, from a fundamental point of view, oil prices this morning, when we hit the 120, were up 90% from a month ago. So it is a real problem. People are pricing in a real problem, and structure, the backwardation in markets. From a sort of trading point of view, that is not a conducive environment to put oil in storage because it's going to cost you so much more money. So it is a grave problem that we have. Smithy, coming to you on this. I've just read that France say that the G7 are not there yet on releasing stockpiles out of Europe. I think that there's obviously bureaucracy that's involved, but the Americas, if we're just talking about the States and how the system works there, obviously the Venezuela issue, the refiners that, are people willing to invest in refineries in, say, Pad 3, it looks like they are. Pad 5, not so much. But the TMX pipeline as well, we spoke about that, I think, last year. But one question we've had in is how insulated is the Americas system from all of this going on in terms of supply? Like resilience is certainly a word that the US oil industry knows all too well, especially as you mentioned earlier on with Johannes's article around being able to lock in flat price at 75 to $80 a barrel, which is the key number for them. But I mean, how sort of insulated is it? And also, are the US able to sort of I haven't looked at the drill count on a Friday that's come out. Has that increased? Are people putting the money in to sort of get oil out of the ground? What's going on?
It's probably going to be a lag basis to see that showing up,
Yeah.
right? And we haven't seen that number drop off, even if we've seen because the increasing efficiencies coming through even before all this happened. And so, but in terms of being insulated, absolutely, right? Because the US is pulling it's crude, 4 million barrels a day from Canada there. We're getting maybe 1 million a little more into the US Gulf Coast. These are Latin American barrels, predominantly pickup we've seen in Venezuela.
Yeah.
And then, but generally, the only one concern, right, is you may see West African being pulled away from going into the East Coast. You may see some Latin American being pulled away from the Gulf Coast. But really, the US is in a great situation in terms of being not from an inventory perspective, and in terms of being able to cover its needs.
Yeah, because I mean, you've been traveling a lot as you always do. But what's the mood like when you're in your meetings? And we're talking, to name names, of course. When you're in Houston, entertaining and wheeler dealing as Matty Smith does, what's the mood like with the producers down there?
Fine, actually. Even when we were back like high 50s or whatever, the producers are feeling pretty good about themselves. And so even at levels where we thought there was the potential break even last year, it feels it's taken a step lower here. As I mentioned, like just these prices right now for them is an absolute dream. And so, there's been so much consolidation in the US already that you kind
Yeah.
of taken that boom and bust out of production just because you have these large players that have already planned what they're going to be doing prior. It's the what this is doing with this rally we're seeing is giving the smaller players the ability to go in and hedge when perhaps they wouldn't have done. And so that's going to give us more certainty of supply
So
going forward here.
yeah, I mean, so drill baby drill. It was a big part of the manifesto. It was a big part of. We're not getting into politics here, but we have to because
Yeah.
it's front and center. Um, when that drill baby drill was kind of negated when Donald Trump also said that he wanted to keep energy prices low.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you. I was thinking that as you were saying it, it's like the drill baby drill thing is just like paying lip service, right? Because he wanted the lower prices of the pump more than anything else.
Yeah.
That's why right now he must be so angry with where prices at the pump are because his base is seeing that billboard every single time that he gets in his car and drives. The prices at the pump are up 50 cents over the last week, and so
Yeah.
yeah, it's the drill baby drill thing is, it was clearly shown to be not something that was a priority for him.
Yeah. And just coming on to what's kind of dominating the headlines today, if you whatever I mean, I don't even know what news value is trumping which news value, excuse the pun. But when we're talking about SPR, what does that mean in reality? Like, what are current SPR? I mean, I'm putting you on the spot here, I know, but I mean, any idea what are current SPR levels in, say, the States right now, roughly?
400
Say
million.
400 million. And okay, so when you're drawing down, how much? What are we talking about a drawdown of if the US needed to release some from SPR? And I'll come to Michelle on
But
this in a minute, as well. But go on.
yeah, it's a logistical challenge, right? Because like there's only so much you can be pulling out. In the same way, it's harder to be putting it back in, to be honest. But like even just pulling it out, it's not like we can be like, okay, we're going to take 50 million barrels out. Let's do it in over the next week, right? It's going to be a gradual thing.
Right.
And so that's why we were talking about with it being, and to Michelle's point, right, is it's not sentimental barrel because it is a physical barrel, but you're not going to be able to tap that by any meaningful way straight away when you're looking at a 15 million barrel a day loss every single day here from the Strait of Hormuz, right? It's
Yeah.
going to be a creeper effect essentially.
Yeah. I mean, as look, I mean, we got 7 minutes left. Get your last questions in to everyone. We've got loads of questions. I really thank you. And it's we're trying to move as quick as the market is. We're not. Unfortunately, my 46-year-old brain can't keep up as much as it used to, but we shall try. But do you think as well? I put this question to Sumit earlier on. This is probably the question. Do you think there should be sort of more collusion with the US, the EU, probably Japan, not China's necessarily? I'm not singling them out with these what seemingly is a global policy for some want of a better term around SPR releases to give a temporary reprieve around the spike in energy prices. The US are doing their thing, the EU are talking about their thing, Japan are talking about their thing. A global policy would ease oil prices. Why do you think that everyone's on their own sort of direction?
No, but they're going to, right? And Michelle can chime in here too, but it's like a G7 thing that's looking to do this, right? So it is in collusion, it's going to be across them.
Right.
Yeah, it's just the US is a big player in that because the US has the biggest SPR.
Right. Okay. All right. Look, cheers, mate. I'll come back to you, mate, before and just get your final thoughts on what's going on in the market right now. It's 5 minutes
Matt,
left.
I was just going to add,
Yes.
there's supposed to be a meeting, I think, this morning, New York time, at the IEA on this, but maybe it happened already while
So
we're
who?
hosting.
So who's? You're in a room. Say Homayun's in the room. He gets invited to talk about the SPR. Who else is in that room?
Reported is the G7 plus IEA, all the IEA countries.
IEA. Okay. And what do you, in your view, what do you think the market is expecting? Because the market is kind of sold. Do you think the market reaction, like Michelle said, corrected me, and she's absolutely spot on. We're still up $10 a barrel. Still a big volume on the big move on the day. But the ebbing off, do you think is that the reaction to a possible release of SPR barrels?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think you said it right. Like there was so far. I think G7 said they're not there yet, something like
Mm,
that. So I'm surprised not to see a move back up on prices, but I would say that it's very likely that if it doesn't happen yet, we'll see prices continue to rise and kind of pressure the US and the G7 more widely to do something. I think the market will want to have its barrels somehow, whether that's from the Middle East or whether that's from the SPR.
yeah, yeah, you're right. And look, crude oil is a bit like everyone only wants to talk about Manchester United. There are other teams in the Premier League that people want to talk about people, but what about the smaller products? I know you're a crude guy, had a crude analysis, but when we're talking about just a quick one on this, LPG, naphthas, biofuels, it's all part of the energy mix. They don't get any, well, Kieran would tell me off for saying this because he's our NGLs expert, but the effect on LPG, for example, just quick, and I assume it put something on this. You know, lots of people live in India, rely on, say, bottled gas and all that. This is something that hasn't really been discussed, but it's still got a massive effect. Crude is one, and I know crude oil's largely, the way to aggregate what's happening across the barrel. But the smaller products, the LPGs, LNG, for an example, doesn't get as many column inches as crude oil does. But there's more of a profound effect on the end user on those smaller products that are used for domestically than there is crude oil, right? Just your quick thought on that.
I wonder if Sumit's still here. He'd be much
No, he heard
more.
the question and he left. So I think he wanted out on that.
Look, I'm no expert on products, but I would say that you look at the reaction in middle distillates, it's been crazy, right? And you've noticed it too, Matt.
Yeah,
I think it looks like though we've started to see some naphtha cracks also go rather crazy. So it does actually suggest that we should see a reshuffling of the flows. And I think one of the impacts of what's going on right now is, potentially we're going to see a lot more US barrels come into Asia, as Asia will try to pull, and those in the naphtha crackers will want to make the most out of the current situation. But I would believe that, and I mean Michelle already touched on that, is the fact that given where given where the price of products are heading, I would say that you don't need to go much higher until you see some demand destruction already.
yeah,
And a bit like, I mean, obviously 2022 is very different because it didn't have a supply shock. But as soon as you hear talks of demand destruction and um, economic growth becoming negative, so recession, that's also a kind of signal for the market that the peak is already there. Now, it's a different situation because we have
yeah,
that supply shock, but I wouldn't undermine the fact that before this war happened, we were in an oversupplied market, especially for this time of the year, March, April, and
yeah.
that's because a lot of refineries are going into maintenance. So in a sense, it's good that it's happening now because the market, even though prices have risen, you can take it much easier than if it happened during the summer.
Yeah. Okay. Look, thanks, mate. Look, we've got 2 minutes left. Thanks for your comments and stuff. I mean, we all really appreciate it. We'll see you on the next one. Michelle, when it comes to you for getting closing thoughts with Smithy, we've had some questions in. I can't repeat some of them, but they're all around the market reaction to the Trump administration, what the response has been, what all that means. We heard last week, don't worry about Straits of Hormuz because I've got the US Finance Corporation to come in and they're going to insure all these vessels and haven't really heard much about that. And there's 4 to 6 weeks. Don't worry, because it's only 4 to 6 weeks, and it was only going to be three, whatever it is. I think you absolutely called it spot on around demand destruction. I think the one thing that history does is repeat itself, and people were anticipating what happened last year. But just your view, just quick, just 30 seconds on how much do you now see the US, coming up with policies in order to ease the current situation? Forget SPRs, but around logistics, infrastructure, so barrels move again so that the whole market kind of can take a breather. How much do you think we'll see from the US in the next couple of weeks?
I think they're going to try. These high prices will motivate them. It's not just high oil prices, right? The rates market's going crazy. The equity market's selling off, right? Like the market is the only thing that is the guardrails to the administration. And so because this has gone off the rails, we're going to see some sort of implementation, whether it's using US military to guide ships through the strait, which is probably like poking a tiny hole in a big full bucket. So a little bit will be able to seep out. Certainly, we're not going to see the same flows that we saw before for, I would suspect, for a very long time. Insurance, if insurance is a problem, the US will provide insurance. It will be, not a lot of people have like jumped on that. I'm also curious how many people feel comfortable that the US government will pay out these insurance policies if something does happen. So I'm not sure. There's also a lot of like trust in the US government globally. And so I think there are a lot of still challenges that the US has to face, but they will, I think, as the markets start to punish them, they will come up with any solution that they can to set it straight.
All right, look, thanks, Michelle. Smith, I'm going to come to you now, but I wanted to thank Michelle for that article yesterday. Any of the articles anyone needs who's on the call, you can reach out to us. Any one of us will send them to you, and I know Michelle will be keeping to update. But great work on that. What did you call it? The Kepler War Endurance Model.
I know everybody's like, "Is that an internal model?" And I'm like, "I just made it."
Just made it up. That's what we do. No, it's really
Sorry,
good.
the model is complicated, but I just made it up. Yes.
Okay. No, look, great work. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for your comments. Sorry to put you under the spot sometimes, but I'm not that sorry. Anyway, Smithy, we'll come to you. Closing thoughts. Look, all we could talk about Q4 was the glut, how much oil's on the water, save everyone, prices are going to 40. Bit different now, mate. Where are prices going now, Q2? Tell us.
In Q2, well, we're gonna move higher as long as the Strait of Hormuz is closed. But Homayun said something great at the beginning, at the top of this, right? Which is just that everything that's happening here is probably going to be bearish later on. With its US production, if we do SPR releases, all that kind of stuff. And so once this does get resolved, there was the glut, right? It was just in the sanctioned barrel side of the picture here. And that's something to bear in mind too, is that if we do get resolution with Iran, we've got what, 50 million barrels of Iranian crude that sat off of China and Malaysia there. If that were going to be freed up to come to the legitimate market, you'd say, okay, now we have Venezuelan come back to the market. We've got Iranian come back to the market. That could be bearish. So while we have to be careful, while it's fair to be swept up in the bullishness of right now, there's the potential that this is bearish as we move into Q3.
Yeah,
Q3, Q2, sorry.
I was going to say, you're jumping a quarter, but it's fine. We don't mind time travel. Look, thanks, mate. Everyone, Sumit, Homayoun, Michelle, Smithy, of course. Everyone has joined. The reach out to us if any of you need any of us. And look, thanks. Another great webinar. Kepler are always here as and when you need clarity from chaos, and chaos it certainly is. Good to see everyone. Stay safe. Be good. If you can't be good, be careful. I'll see you later.